After 17 years of working as the senior engineer, my boss fired me. He said, "You are too expensive. Your salary can pay 5 junior engineers." I did not argue, just cleared my desk and walked out politely. The next morning, I woke up to 40 calls from him. Panic had set in. "Hello. Thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It would be great if you can also comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story." Today, our special shout out goes to Michael Paulson from Ontario. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's dive into the details of today's story. I had always believed my work spoke for itself. 17 years of dedication, countless late nights, and a steady track record of solving problems the company's leadership couldn't even begin to understand. In a field like engineering, experience is everything. I had seen it all. From the early days when we were still a small firm trying to carve out a name for ourselves, to the massive expansion that came once we solidified our place in the industry. But on that morning, everything changed. I was called into Samuel King's office, my boss for over a decade, and I knew something was off. He wasn't his usual self. The familiar warmth in his tone was replaced with a cold professionalism I hadn't heard before. Samuel, the CEO of the company I had built my career around, sat across from me, the blinds casting shadows across his face. I had been expecting a new project or a discussion about upcoming deadlines. Instead, his words hit me like a freight train. "You're too expensive, David," he said, his voice calm but unwavering. "Your salary could pay for 5 junior engineers, and quite frankly, you've been here long enough. The company's needs have changed." I stared at him, not sure if the words had fully sunk in. He was the man I had worked for all these years, the one who had trusted me with critical projects, who had respected my ability to lead. I never imagined that the day would come when he would reduce me to nothing more than a cost-cutting measure. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "I see," I replied, not quite believing it. There was nothing else I could say. I knew the numbers didn't lie, but I also knew that experience like mine wasn't something you could put a price on. Still, the reality of the situation hit me like a wave, and there was no point in arguing. I was being let go, and nothing I said would change that. "Are you sure about this, Samuel?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, as if asking the question would somehow change the outcome. Samuel's gaze was firm. "It's final, David. It's a decision I've already made. We need younger talent, people who can hit higher targets at a lower cost. You've been invaluable, but we need to move in a different direction." I nodded slowly, processing what he had just told me. There was no room for negotiation, no further discussion. The words, "Thank you for your service," weren't even offered. He stood up, extending his hand toward me, his face unreadable. "Good luck," he said. "We'll have HR handle your exit paperwork." I shook his hand, though it felt surreal, as if I was shaking hands with a stranger. The office, which had once been a place of pride, now felt hollow and foreign. I had spent over half my life working for this company, and in an instant, I was being discarded. I didn't protest. Instead, I stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked out of the office, my steps measured and deliberate. The walk back to my desk was slow, as if the reality of the situation hadn't quite settled in yet. The familiar faces of my coworkers looked at me with a mixture of surprise and sympathy, but no one said anything. They didn't know what to say, and honestly, neither did I. I cleared my desk with precision, organizing my things in silence. I'd put in my time, earned my place, and now it was over. The feeling of walking out of that building was strange. There was no anger, no bitterness, just a quiet resignation. I had been in this business long enough to know that the company would eventually regret this decision. They wouldn't be able to replace me, not easily, anyway. As I stepped out into the parking lot, I took a deep breath, letting the cold air fill my lungs. It felt like a new beginning, though it was hard to shake the sense of loss. I had dedicated myself to this job for so long. And yet, in the blink of an eye, I was expendable. I hadn't been angry when they fired me. I had expected it in a way, but I didn't realize how deeply it would affect me. I had always prided myself on being indispensable, but now I was just another person who had been tossed aside when the company needed to cut costs. When I got home, I sat in my chair, staring out the window at nothing in particular. The phone buzzed on the table beside me, and I glanced down to see that I had missed 40 calls. They were all from Samuel and Carol, the head of HR. The messages were frantic, pleading for me to come back, to discuss things further, but I wasn't interested in hearing them out. I had already made my decision. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about respect. And I wasn't going to let anyone undervalue me again. The next morning, I woke up to even more missed calls. There were text messages too, each one more desperate than the last. Samuel was begging me to return to the company. "We were wrong, David. Please, come back," the text read. But I didn't need to listen to them. It was too late for apologies. I had already moved on. I knew that I had to make them realize my worth, and I would do it on my own terms. I didn't owe them anything, not anymore. The offer was simple. If they wanted me back, they would have to pay me twice what they had paid me before. Otherwise, they would get nothing. I wasn't going to let them use me again, not without offering me the respect I had earned. As I sat there, looking at the messages, I smiled. It was their turn to panic, and I was going to enjoy every moment of it. The following morning, the relentless stream of missed calls and texts from Samuel and Carol continued. 40 calls the day before, and now I had even more to sift through. At first, I didn't know whether to laugh or be annoyed. The desperation in their voices, the panic in their messages, it was as if the company had just realized they had lost the crown jewel of their engineering department. But there was no rush to respond. I had time now, something I hadn't had in years. Time to reflect, to plan my next steps. I let the phone sit on the table as I went through my morning routine. A part of me was still in disbelief that it had all come to this. 17 years of loyalty, and it ended in a single sentence. It wasn't the words themselves that stung, but the finality in Samuel's tone. The decision had been made without a second thought, as if I were just another expense to cut. I shook off the thought. It was over, and there was no point in lingering on it. After breakfast, I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and began drafting a response. Not just any response, but one that would make them understand that I wasn't coming back without serious compensation. This wasn't about being petty, it was about showing them that they couldn't just discard people without facing consequences. My experience wasn't something that could be replaced overnight. The value I brought to the company was immeasurable, and if they were going to take me for granted, I would make sure they felt the loss. I carefully crafted the message. "I appreciate your calls," I wrote, "but my decision remains unchanged. If you want my services, you'll have to meet my terms. I'll consult for double the amount you were paying me. Otherwise, I'm moving forward with my career elsewhere. You know where to find me." I hesitated for a moment before hitting send. There was no turning back now. This was the line in the sand. If they wanted me back, they would have to come to me on my terms. If not, they could continue scrambling to replace me. The text was sent. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, the weight of the situation sinking in. The silence that followed felt strange, almost too quiet. The world outside my window continued to turn, but in my little corner of it, everything had shifted. There was no longer a company calling the shots. No longer anyone telling me what to do. I had reclaimed my independence, and with that came an entirely new sense of freedom. Hours passed, and the phone remained silent. No follow-up texts, no calls, nothing. It wasn't until the evening when I got the first real response. Samuel's name popped up on my screen, his number flashing like a beacon in the dark. I picked up the phone, knowing full well that this conversation would be very different from the ones we'd had in the past. "David," Samuel began, his voice strained. "Please, let's talk. We've made a mistake. We can't do this without you. You've been a cornerstone of this company for years. You're irreplaceable. Please reconsider." I couldn't help but let out a small chuckle. Irreplaceable? He was just now realizing that? I had always known it, but now they were finally waking up to the truth. "I'm listening," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "I understand why you're upset," Samuel continued, his voice tight. "But we need you. The company is facing some serious challenges without your expertise. We've tried bringing in the junior engineers, but the results are disastrous. We're losing clients, David. We're on the brink of failure." I could hear the desperation in his voice, the edge of panic that wasn't there before. This wasn't the confident, self-assured CEO I had worked with. This was a man who was now afraid of losing control. "Samuel," I said, my voice calm, "I told you what I need. You either pay me twice what you were offering before, or you get nothing. No more talks, no more negotiations. Take it or leave it. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head as he considered his options. Finally, he spoke. Fine. You've got it. We'll pay you double. But you have to help us out of this mess. You're our last hope, David. I didn't respond immediately. I could have dragged it out further, but I didn't want to push my luck. They had agreed to my terms. That was enough. For now. Good, I said simply. I'll be in touch with the details. I hung up the phone and sat back in my chair, a small, satisfied smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. The company was on the verge of collapse, and I was the only one who could save them. But the price for that help was steep. They had no choice now but to pay it. I wasn't about to let them forget how much they needed me. The next few days passed in a blur of calls and meetings with Samuel and Carol. They were doing everything they could to make up for the mistake they had made. But I wasn't in a rush to jump back in. I would take my time, give them the minimal amount of help necessary to keep the ship afloat, and in return, I would reap the rewards of my experience. It was a delicate dance, but one I had mastered long ago. In the end, I knew I had made the right choice. This was my moment to set the terms of my own future. And for once, I wasn't going to let anyone undervalue me again. It had been a week since I'd sent the ultimatum, and the silence was finally broken. Samuel and Carol had agreed to my terms, but I wasn't sure if I should feel vindicated or merely amused. The truth was, I had already planned for this moment. I knew they would come around eventually. They had no choice. But now, the tables had turned in ways I hadn't fully expected. I was the one with the power, and it felt strange. I wasn't used to being in the position of strength in these relationships. The day I received the confirmation from Samuel was a strange one. I'd spent the previous evening drafting a new consulting proposal, one that would outline my terms clearly. No more working under the same constraints, no more being at their beck and call, and certainly no more answering to a boss who saw me as an expense. If they wanted my help, they were going to pay the price. I knew I wasn't the first person to be pushed aside for cost-saving reasons, but I also knew I was one of the few who had the leverage to turn it all around. The company needed me, and that gave me power I hadn't realized I was capable of wielding. I had spent so many years playing the loyal employee, working long hours and sacrificing my own time for their success. But now, it was time for me to capitalize on that loyalty, to turn all those years of experience into something far more profitable. The phone call came around 3 p.m., just as I was preparing to review a new project proposal from a client who had reached out to me for freelance work. The number on the screen was Samuel's. I could feel a flicker of excitement in my chest as I answered. "David," he said quickly, his voice tight, but with a sense of urgency I hadn't heard before. "We've agreed. We'll meet your terms. You'll get double what you were making before. We need your expertise. Please, help us." I leaned back in my chair, giving myself a moment to savor the sound of him begging. It wasn't vindictive, at least, not entirely. It was simply the realization that I had been right all along. I had been undervalued, and now they were desperate enough to acknowledge it. The scales had shifted, and I had come out on top. "I'm glad to hear that," I replied, keeping my voice calm and controlled. "But there are a few more conditions. I won't be coming in every day. I'll work remotely most of the time and only come in when absolutely necessary. And I'm not going to be your go-to problem solver for every little issue. I'll focus on the high-priority projects, the ones you're struggling with the most. If that works for you, we can move forward." There was another long pause on the other end of the line. Samuel was likely processing the new terms. I could practically hear the gears turning as he considered the impact of what I was saying. The idea that I would only be involved in critical projects was a hard pill for him to swallow. For years, I had been the one to pick up the slack, to make things work when the rest of the team couldn't. But now, I wasn't interested in doing all the heavy lifting anymore. Finally, he responded, "Okay, David. We'll accept that. You've got it. Just, please, don't leave us hanging. The company is in a bad place right now." I could hear the desperation in his voice, but there was something else in his words, something that made me realize just how much control I had in this situation. They needed me, and I wasn't going to let them forget it. "I'll be in touch," I said, ending the call without any more pleasantries. There was no need for any more discussions. The deal had been made, and now it was time for me to take control. That night, I sat down to review all the consulting offers I had received over the past week. They had been steadily pouring in ever since word spread that I was available for freelance work. It was overwhelming at first. So many opportunities, so many new clients, and all of them eager to pay top dollar for my experience. I wasn't just David Matthews anymore. I was a sought-after consultant, an industry expert, and my value had skyrocketed in a way I had never imagined. By the time I finished my research and went to bed that night, my mind was racing. I had built something from nothing, had taken the skills I had honed over the years and turned them into an asset that was now worth more than I could have ever imagined. I had done it. I had taken control of my future, and the rewards were starting to show. The next morning, I went to the office, though not to work as I once had. I was there to outline the terms of my new arrangement with the company. I spent the day drafting a contract, one that would ensure I wouldn't be taken advantage of again. I was no longer the loyal employee who worked for the promise of a paycheck. I was a business, and my time and expertise were valuable. Samuel and Carol had already agreed to pay me twice what I had been making before, but now I was going to make sure they understood the full scope of what they were getting. By the end of the day, I had a document ready, outlining the specifics of my consulting services, my availability, and the terms of payment. I called Samuel, telling him I had everything in place and that we could meet to finalize the agreement. The meeting was set for the following day. That night, as I sat at my desk, reviewing my contract one last time, I couldn't help but smile. The tables had indeed turned. I was no longer at the mercy of a company that had treated me as expendable. I was in control now, and they would soon realize just how much they needed me. The meeting with Samuel and Carol was set for 10 a.m. the next day. I wasn't nervous. I had nothing to lose. I had already made up my mind, and they had already agreed to the terms. Now, it was just a matter of formalizing everything and setting the tone for how things would unfold moving forward. I wasn't about to let them forget who held the power in this relationship, and I was prepared to make sure they respected that. As I walked into the conference room the next morning, Samuel stood up from his seat and greeted me with a strained smile. Carol, the head of HR, was sitting beside him, her posture tense. They both looked slightly uncomfortable, as though they were trying to put on a face of professionalism despite the fact that they were both fully aware of the position they were in. David, Samuel began, his voice tight. I'm glad we could set this up. We appreciate you being willing to come back in a consulting capacity. The company really needs your expertise right now. I took a seat across from them, my hands folded neatly in front of me. I could see the tension in their eyes. They knew they were at my mercy, and while they may have been trying to maintain a semblance of control, the truth was that they had already handed it over to me the moment they agreed to my terms. I'm glad to be here, I replied, my tone calm and collected. But let's be clear, I'm here on my terms. I'm no longer an employee, Samuel. I'm a consultant. That means I work when I want to, on the projects I deem most important. If I take on any work, it's because I choose to, not because you ask. There was a slight hesitation before Samuel responded, as if he was processing what I had just said. I could tell he hadn't fully accepted that things had changed. He was used to calling the shots, and now he was in a position where he had to beg for my help. But that was the reality now. They needed me more than I needed them. I understand, David, Samuel said, his voice strained. And I know we've made mistakes in the past, but we're hoping that you'll consider the bigger picture. We want you to be a part of the company's recovery. We can't afford to lose you. We've seen how hard it is to find someone with your level of experience. You're invaluable to us. Carol nodded in agreement. We're willing to pay you more than we ever have, David. We know your worth, and we'll meet your demands. But we need your help to get back on track. The company is at a crossroads, and without you, we're not sure how we can move forward. I allowed their words to hang in the air for a moment, letting the weight of their desperation sink in. I wasn't in a hurry. I wasn't going to rush this. It had taken me years to get to this point, and now I was going to make sure that every decision I made counted. I wasn't here for charity. I was here for one thing, respect, and they had to earn it. I've already made my position clear, I said, leaning back in my chair. I'm not going to be available full-time. I'll consult on the high-priority projects, but I won't be your go-to guy for everything. I'm done doing all the heavy lifting while everyone else gets credit. I'll be focusing on the areas where I know I can make the most impact, and that means you'll have to prioritize. Samuel's eyes narrowed slightly. We'll prioritize, of course. We just need to know what you'll need from us to make this work. Will you need a dedicated team to work with you? Will you need office space or resources? Whatever you need, we'll make it happen. I could see the wheels turning in Samuel's mind. He was willing to do whatever it took to secure my involvement in the company's recovery. But I had no intention of making this easy for them. This was my moment to show them just how much they had underestimated me. And it was time to make sure they knew exactly what they were getting into. I won't need office space or a team, I said. What I need is simple. The freedom to work at my own pace, on my own terms. If you want my help, I expect total respect for my time. No more micromanaging. No more calling me in for every little issue. You'll get my expertise when I feel it's needed, and when I choose to give it. There was another long pause as Samuel and Carol exchanged looks. I could tell they were both struggling to come to terms with the fact that they had lost the upper hand. But that was the reality now. I wasn't going to make it easy for them to regain control. They had already made their bed, and now they had to lie in it. Finally, Samuel spoke. All right, David. We'll accept those terms. We'll make it work. We'll even throw in a bonus for every successful project you consult on. We'll do whatever it takes to ensure you're satisfied. I nodded, knowing that this was the best I was going to get. It wasn't about greed. It was about ensuring that I would be treated with the respect I deserved. They were finally acknowledging my value, and that was what mattered. Good, I said, standing up to leave. I'll have my contract ready by the end of the week. I'll also need full access to all current projects so I can assess where my help is most needed. As I walked out of the room, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. The negotiations were over, and I had come out on top. They were now the ones who had to depend on me, and I was going to make sure they understood that every minute of my time was valuable. The company had made their mistake, but now I was the one who held the power. I was no longer an employee. I was a consultant. And in that moment, I realized just how much I had truly changed. I wasn't beholden to anyone anymore. I was free. Over the next few weeks, the company quickly began to realize the truth of what they had agreed to. I was no longer an employee. I was a consultant, a professional with terms, and they had to work around my schedule. My phone had stopped buzzing with last-minute requests, and I wasn't inundated with tasks that had no real importance. I was only contacted when they had critical needs, and that was exactly how I wanted it. But what struck me the most was the shift in power that had taken place. No longer was I sitting in endless meetings, trying to make my voice heard over younger engineers or middle managers. I wasn't at the mercy of a department head who had no idea how to prioritize projects. Instead, I was dictating the terms, making decisions based on what I knew would lead to the most impact and the most compensation. I had been working with the company on a few key projects, an important client-facing application that had been in jeopardy for months, a failing system overhaul that was running over budget, and a critical internal audit that was at risk of failure. My involvement was selective, yet my impact was undeniable. Each project I touched began to turn around. Clients who had been unhappy started coming back with better offers, the budget problems began to settle, and the internal audit was on track to meet its deadlines. But while I was making a difference, I was also growing more aware of how far the company had fallen without me. They weren't able to handle the complex issues on their own, and they had been relying on my expertise to get them out of a jam. The once proud company I had spent 17 years helping to build was now limping along, only functional because I had agreed to consult. One morning, as I was working from home, I received another call from Samuel. His voice was tired, more desperate than I had ever heard it before. David, we need to talk, Samuel said, cutting straight to the point. There's been a setback. One of the projects you were involved in, the one with the audit, has hit a snag. The board is starting to question whether we can make it on time. If we don't fix it, it could ruin everything. I need you back in the office for this. I leaned back in my chair, thinking about how to respond. I had already given them the terms, but hearing the panic in Samuel's voice made me pause. They need me more than I need them, I thought. But I couldn't deny that I had a personal stake in seeing this through. After all, I had spent so many years working with this team, helping them grow. In some ways, they were still my team. I had the power to fix it, and if I did, I knew I could secure my position even further. "I'll come in," I said calmly. "But remember what I told you. I'm not going to do this alone. If you want this project back on track, you'll need to give me the resources I need. I won't be the one shouldering the load like I used to." Samuel didn't hesitate. "Of course, David. Whatever you need." I could hear the relief in his voice, but I didn't feel sorry for him. I had played my cards carefully, and now they were falling into place. As much as they wanted to act like everything was business as usual, the truth was that the company was in crisis mode, and I was their only lifeline. That afternoon, I went into the office, but this time it was different. There was no welcome back or reassurances about how much my contributions were valued. Everyone knew why I was there, to save their skins. I walked through the doors with a sense of purpose, but also with an understanding of how much power I truly held. The project was in shambles. I could see it the moment I walked into the meeting room. The team was scattered, disorganized, and there were far too many voices trying to lead the charge. The senior project manager was in over his head, and the junior engineers were looking to him for answers. I took a seat at the table, studying the team's work, and the chaos was palpable. Samuel and Carol were both there, sitting at the head of the table, waiting for me to take charge. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for them, but that feeling passed quickly. They had put themselves in this position, and now they needed to accept the consequences. "All right," I said, taking a deep breath. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to work with the team on streamlining the process. We need to get the audit back on track, and we need to reallocate some of the resources from the failing system overhaul. But this isn't going to be quick. We have to take a step back, regroup, and reprioritize." There was an uneasy silence in the room. Samuel opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my hand to stop him. "No more excuses," I said firmly. "If you want this project to succeed, you need to give me the space to do it right. We don't have time for hesitation." The next few days were a blur of meetings, late nights, and constant strategizing. But something felt different this time. I wasn't just a cog in the machine anymore. I wasn't the one who had to stay late and pick up the slack. I made the decisions, and the team followed my lead. The power had shifted from the top down to the people who actually knew how to get the job done, me and my trusted colleagues. By the end of the week, we had managed to bring the audit back on track. The system overhaul, while still behind schedule, had stabilized. Clients who had been previously dissatisfied were beginning to express more confidence in the company's ability to deliver. And for the first time in a long time, I could see the company moving forward because I had taken control of its destiny. But even though I had helped them recover, the truth remained. The company needed me more than I needed them. I had proven my worth, and now I was truly in charge. And as I walked out of the office that Friday evening, I couldn't help but smile. This was just the beginning. As the weeks passed, the company's reliance on me only grew. Every project I touched seemed to improve, but the more I worked, the more I realized how little I truly cared about the success of the business anymore. Sure, I had been invested for years, but now I saw them for what they really were, just another company with a hierarchy of people trying to outdo each other, pretending that their contributions were more vital than they actually were. And yet, it wasn't enough to make me angry. If anything, I had become more detached. The truth was, I had already won. They had come to me with open hands, willing to pay whatever I asked to ensure their survival. And in the end, that was the sweetest victory. I had proven my worth, and not only had I secured the financial compensation I deserved, but I had also set myself up for a future where I was no longer shackled by loyalty or any semblance of servitude. But, like with any great victory, there was a bittersweet satisfaction in knowing that they had fallen from their pedestal. It wasn't enough to simply help them out of a jam. It wasn't enough for me to get paid twice what I had been before. I needed to see them fully understand the extent of their mistake. I needed them to realize just how much they depended on me, and how easy it would be to leave them behind if I chose to. It happened one Tuesday, when Samuel called me in a panic. We had just finished a major project the week before, a client-facing application that had taken months to develop, and I had been given credit for its success. But Samuel's voice on the other end of the line was not one of gratitude. It was one of desperation. "David, we've hit another snag," he said. "There's been an issue with the app." Some of the new features aren't working properly, and the client is threatening to pull out if we don't fix it immediately. We need you to come in. We need your expertise." I listened to the panic in his voice, but I didn't respond right away. I didn't need to. He was asking for my help again, after all the power I had shown him. I had already given him my price, and it wasn't just about money anymore. It was about letting him sweat, letting him feel the weight of his decisions. "David?" Samuel asked again, more urgent this time. "Here's the thing," I said, my voice calm. "You're going to have to figure this one out on your own. I've already given you my terms. If you want to keep your clients and maintain your reputation, then you'll have to manage without me for this one." There was silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the panic building as Samuel processed what I was saying. "David, you can't be serious," he said finally. "We're not going to be able to fix this without you. Please, we can't lose this client. We'll do whatever it takes to make this right." I let him plead for a few more moments, but in the end, I knew what I had to do. It was time for them to feel the consequences of their actions. If they didn't understand my worth now, they never would. And besides, I wasn't interested in being the company's safety net any longer. I had already proven everything I needed to prove. "Samuel," I said, my tone firm, "I'm not going to be your backup anymore. You made the decision to cut me loose, and now you'll have to deal with the fallout. I've already moved on. You're on your own." I hung up before he could respond, leaving him to stew in the consequences of his actions. I could feel a sense of satisfaction bubbling up within me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was simply in control. And now, they were going to realize just how much they had taken me for granted. The next few days were a whirlwind of emails and phone calls from Samuel, Carol, and others within the company. They begged me to reconsider. They begged for my help, offering to pay even more money if I would just come in and save them once again. But it wasn't the money that mattered to me anymore. It was the principle. It was the realization that I had earned my place at the top, and no one could take that from me. I ignored their calls. I ignored their messages. Instead, I spent my time focusing on new opportunities. I had already started building my own consulting business, and the world beyond the company doors was full of possibilities. As the days passed, the panic in their voices grew more desperate. But I wasn't moved. The satisfaction I felt from watching them squirm was more than enough. Finally, a week later, I received a text from Carol. It was a simple message, but the tone had changed. It was no longer a plea for help. It was a confession of sorts, an admission of their failure. "David," she wrote, "we've managed to fix the issue with the app on our own. But we realize now how much we relied on you. I think we both know that the company wouldn't have made it without you. We're sorry for how things turned out." I stared at the message for a long time, letting it sink in. The apology was hollow, but it didn't matter anymore. They had finally realized what they had lost, but by then, it was too late. I replied simply, "I wish you the best." And that was that. I had won, not just in the financial sense, but in the personal sense. I had proven my worth, taken control of my future, and walked away from a company that had underestimated me for far too long. The days after I walked away from that company felt like a slow, deliberate exhale. The tension that had been building for years of working long hours, always being the dependable one, always taking on more responsibility than I should have, had finally dissipated. I was free. Free from the pressure, free from the expectations, and most importantly, free from being undervalued. Over the next few months, I focused on building my own consulting firm. It wasn't just about securing lucrative contracts. It was about reclaiming my time, my energy, and my passion for the work I had always loved. I didn't need anyone else to validate my worth anymore. I was in control of every decision I made, from the clients I chose to work with, to the terms I set, to the hours I decided to work. The freedom was intoxicating. The phone calls from Samuel, Carol, and the others at the company trickled to a stop. I had expected them to reach out, hoping to mend the bridge, but the silence spoke volumes. They had underestimated me for too long. I wasn't angry. I didn't feel the need to prove anything to them anymore. But it was clear they had learned their lesson the hard way. As I built my client base, I began working with some of the biggest names in the industry. Companies that had once looked at me as a simple cog in the machine now sought my expertise. I was advising on high-stakes projects, helping startups scale, and troubleshooting systems that had become too complicated for in-house teams to handle. My name started to gain recognition, and it wasn't long before I was speaking at industry conferences, sharing my insights and strategies with others in the field. Every time I took on a new project, I felt the rush of power. The knowledge that I was the one in charge, that I was the one calling the shots, was something I had never experienced before. I was my own boss, and I could finally appreciate the value of my own expertise without having to fight for recognition or scrap for acknowledgement. The more I helped other companies succeed, the more my reputation grew. And as my reputation grew, so did my business. But it wasn't just the work that brought me satisfaction. It was the simple realization that I had done something many people only dream of. I had walked away from a company that had taken me for granted and, in doing so, had created something far greater than I ever thought possible. I had built a life where my skills were respected, where my worth was never questioned, and where I was finally in control. One afternoon, a former colleague from the company, Lucas, a junior engineer I had mentored during my time there, reached out to me. I hadn't heard from him in months, and his name popping up on my phone was a reminder of how things had changed. "David, I hope you're doing well," he began, his tone tentative. "I just wanted to thank you for everything you taught me. I know things ended badly with the company, but I just wanted to say that I've learned a lot from you. And honestly, I don't think the team would have made it without you. I've been talking to some of the others, and we all realize how much you held everything together. I guess I just wanted to tell you that I appreciate you, even if things didn't end the way anyone expected." His words hit me differently than I anticipated. I had no animosity towards him. He was just a kid trying to figure out his place in the world, just like I had been once. But hearing someone acknowledge my contribution, even in the face of all that had happened, gave me a sense of peace. It was a reminder that, despite the circumstances, I had made a lasting impact on the people who worked with me. "I appreciate you saying that, Lucas," I replied. "You're a good guy, and I know you'll do well. Just keep pushing yourself and never forget your worth." As I ended the call, I leaned back in my chair, a small smile on my face. It was a nice reminder that I hadn't burned every bridge. The people who truly respected me knew what I had brought to the table, and those who didn't, well, they were the ones who would have to live with their regrets. That evening, as I sat down to review a new project proposal for a client I had recently signed, I reflected on how far I had come. I had left behind a company that had seen me as expendable and had built something new from the ground up. I had reclaimed my time, my expertise, and most importantly, my respect. The company that had fired me was still floundering, still trying to keep up appearances, but they were a shell of their former self. I had given them everything, and when they no longer needed me, they tossed me aside. But that mistake had been their downfall, not mine. I took a deep breath and smiled. The future was limitless now. The opportunities were endless, and the best part was that I was in control. I wasn't just a cog in the machine anymore. I was the one who built the machine. As the days turned into months, my reputation continued to grow. I wasn't just the senior engineer they had fired. I wasn't just the consultant they needed to rescue their failing projects. I was David Matthews, the expert, the one who had taken the reins of his own destiny. And nothing could take that away from me. Thank you for listening to David's journey. If this story resonated with you, remember, knowing your worth and standing up for yourself is the first step toward real change. Don't let anyone undervalue your skills, and always take control of your future. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more empowering tales of resilience and success. Stay tuned for the next one.